Thank you to the team that's continued to be in the conversation tonight with the board. Lots of things going on across Nelson County schools as we really emerge out of what we hope to be this pandemic in the next few months and continue into the 2021-2022 school year. So this Future Center Facility Plan booklet is really a conversation starter. I think it's important that when we enter into these conversations that we have a strong start and an understanding of where we feel like is going to be important. And I think for so long as we think about the nature of facility planning, we're often looking at the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that as we look at the last 5 to 10 years, we've learned a lot about education. We've also learned a lot about what the future will demand. In fact, I think the last 5 to 10 months have also accelerated our ability to see further into the future. As some context, 2 years ago, the Nelson County Schools started in the local planning committee conversation, which is really the legislative arm that allows for any facility funding to occur that would lead to any significant change in the school district. That occurs every 4 years in every district across the state of Kentucky as a part of law. In Nelson County, we did that 2 years ago. And at the time, to be frank, we were just getting a conversation started. I personally was transitioning in a new role, and the funding pattern wasn't clear around how much funds we were going to be able to utilize for the future of school. All those things considered, we made no recommendations on the future facilities other than evaluation of buildings and started an initial conversation with the community about what the future could look like. That was all really just a beginner conversation. Some of you in this room were a part of that LPC process. And over the coming weeks, we'll begin to reconvene our local planning committee. The local planning committee is made up of 20 people that then forward on a recommendation to the board that really then forwards that on to the Department of Education for any type of conversation. With that said, that potentially at minimum is a 3-month process that allows us to navigate and talk through what is the future of school demand for Nelson County schools and our facilities. So I say that to say, it's good you're here tonight because this is the beginning of that conversation in Nelson County schools. As we look over the past few years, and really I think even the pandemic, what we've learned is that the future of school is good. School's not going away. In spite of all the mythology around the future of online learning and what schools could be, or charter schools, or whatever consolidation is happening across the world, school's not going away, and we're confident that connecting people in our school buildings is going to be the most important piece of our work. We do recognize that what it looks like in 2030 for kids to learn online, we can't fully predict. But we also know that there's nothing that's going to replace a community of people coming together in a place to be fully engaged. So on the backside of this book, this idea of uniting people, place, and purpose is at the foundation for this conversation around facilities. And to be honest, those of you in the room today that were a part of the school transition in 2010 when Nelson County High School became Nelson County and Thomas Nelson High School. If we knew what we knew today, then, if we could have seen into the future, I believe that we would have recommended a 6-12 model in 2010. And what I talk about today will reiterate that throughout the conversation. But there was no way for us to see that. There was no way for us to understand some of the forces at play. And today, as we look at this conversation, I think we can also look to the past. On the steps of Mount Kentucky Home High School in 1969 were some of your parents, some of your friends, some of our teachers in Nelson County schools. My father was in the school at this time. The following summer, these students would transition to open up Nelson County High School. Why does that matter? I think it's important that as we look to the future, we learn from the past And this group of students were a part of the civil rights movement. They were a part of the Vietnam War, and they were a part of some unique social changes that felt quite fast and furious at that time. They didn't have quite the news networks that we have today with continuously streaming information, and they didn't have this to fill their world with news, whether that was real news or fake news, whatever news falls in between. Here's our reality, is what we can learn from this group of people is that they could not see the future in the same way that we see it today around technology. And we can also learn from this group of people that there is great possibility of people coming together in change and transition. So we also look back over the last 120 years to see what really, not that long ago, is radically different than what we have today. And as we think about the future of the way we organize facilities, the way we do school, we can only imagine what's going to happen over the next 20 or 30 years. So if we look back to 1900, we had 80 schools in Nelson County. 80 different schools on record. There may have been a school called the Plum Run School. In fact, there was. There may have been a school called the Dickerson School that was really made up of the Dickerson family and 6 other people. Because largely these schools were funded by families. There was really no governing anchor to fund schools. It was communities paying money to teachers to teach their children. Some people obviously didn't go to school under those constraints. Some people didn't participate in that conversation. As time allowed, and technology and the economy and industrialization continued to evolve, the federal government and the state government started to fund public schools. And that led to the beginnings of what became really Nelson County schools as we know it today. In this conversation, I think it's important that we see it felt like radical change at that time. We went from only transitioning from I guess it was your feet or a horse or a donkey to automobiles and buses and all these things for a few decades that allowed communities to come together. Whether we think that's good change, whether we want to go back to the 1900s or whether we want to go back to 1980 and move before the pre-internet era, or not, isn't really the issue. Because these students here, most importantly, as you drive down this road on 245, there is a drive-in movie theater. Life in school was a little bit more like a drive-in movie theater in 1969. And today, as we know, it looks a lot more like Netflix and YouTube. And school also looked more like a drive-in movie theater or a theater than it does today, as it will continue to evolve for choice of students, for choice of families, and for choice of professionals. That is a reality that is a part of this emerging world that we continue to enter into. So, similar chaos, different time, different reality for them in the workforce. I think it's also, if you think about the last 60 years, our schools that my father grew up in started as desegregated schools at that time. So desegregation happened in Nelson County in 1959. That's not that long ago. In 1963, schools were all white, 17 were all black, and at that time, all the teachers were of the same race as the students. As you know, the world has changed drastically since then, but that's really going back to 1959 when integration slowly began in Nelson County and across the country. The last 60 years really make up in Nelson County where we are today. And I share this with you because I think it's really important as we look to the next 20 years. New Haven and Foster Heights, the current structures before Foster Heights remodel, still there, were built in the late 1950s. Still federally, state funded heavily. 1960s, Nelson County High School and the Area Technology Center came to life, and further consolidation occurred of our high schools. In the 1990s, this school right here was built, along with Bloomfield Middle School. And I think it's really important for those of you with the document around school funding, tax hearing, it's really important that you look at that, because in 1990, there was a major shift in funding for schools that impacts where we sit right now and where we can sit next month and where we can sit the month after that. The Kentucky Education Reform Act impacted school funding. Our local tax rate at that time in 1990 was around 24 cents. Obviously, it, along with other community accounts, has evolved in the last 30 years. In 1994, the local nickel tax started as a part of the original nickel, it was called. 5 cents of our tax rate started to fund school funding. This school and the other 8 schools that would emerge over the next 20 years were a part of that original nickel and continued funding of schools through facility plans. Why is that relevant today? Because that's what continues to fund school facilities across Nelson County and across Kentucky. Local communities, local boards of education have an opportunity to generate local funds. I think importantly, the decisions in Nelson County were made in 1994, 2001, and 2004. At this time, there are no more decisions to be made about local funding of facilities in Nelson County. Those decisions were made 17 years ago. And the decisions were made because population growth in Nelson County boomed from 1990 to 2010. In fact, over the last 30 years, we've almost seen population throughout the county double. With that said, that led us to build Boston School, Old Kentucky Home Middle School, Boston Elementary School, Bloomfoot Elementary School, the Academy, the Central Office, Early Learning Center, Thomas Nelson High School, and remodel Foster Heights. This is a byproduct of decisions that were made 17, 18, 19, 20 years ago. We were able to do that. So as we look towards the future and we think about what does the future of learning look like, what's the future demand of our schools, we have to look at the reality of the past, how we got here. And there are sunk costs, if you will. We've spent money on things, this building being one of them. As you can see in here, it's still continuing to be an investment for our school community. As we look to the future, though, we know things will continue to evolve. And if we build schools, we can't necessarily think of it through the lens of what we needed, what we thought we needed in 1970 or 1980 or 1990. High school has radically changed. From when I was in school, from when you were in school, from when so many of us in this room, the last 5 years, high school experiences are radically changing towards early college and career opportunities for children. The reason is simple. When we prepare someone to leave high school, purely as an academic construct only, the entire construct, they leave us and enter into a world that really, if they're not going to a four-year university, have little connection to work, people in their community, a sense of success and self-efficacy. That is the purpose we want kids to develop through their experiences. We have today in our schools, as Ms. Arnold acknowledged, 88% of our students working as a byproduct of learning in the community, on the job. That has shifted from 20% 3.5 years ago, 20% to 88%. Additionally, our early college numbers have continued to rise with kids taking advantage of state grant money and opportunities to get early access to college. Why is that relevant? The kids in our high schools are not in our high schools in the same way they once were. Our juniors and seniors continue to expand opportunities outside of our schools. The other reality is the expectations for middle school students continues to expand as we think about what the demands of transitioning out of high school looks like. The reality of the students on the step at middle school or high school to today looks very different. So we believe that a big piece of the future of our facility model must connect people and communities together. It must unite people and resources along an experience that's going to generate more and more opportunity for those kids. Specifically, academic course offerings, whether that be some of the conversations we've had today in the arts, whether that be conversations around the future of mathematics and STEM, whether that be around the future of the way we think about micro schools and kids having multiple access points. We also know we want kids to pursue early college and career opportunities. And lastly, and this is something that I think it's interesting, people think about this through their own lens. Student leadership to us looks like student organizations, FFA, Beta Club. It also looks like football, basketball, soccer. Those are all things that give students connections to people, place, and purpose. Lastly, we know that our community, working with we have 6 places of secondary learning today. So there are 6 schools in our district that are secondary learning institutions. We want to consolidate resources to maximize and optimize opportunities at 2 campuses that allow our kids, when they enter into secondary school, to have access to not only academic course offerings, but resources that our community will be able to partner with us on, like they're beginning to do over the past few years. Additionally, we expect over the coming decade that learning will become more and more decentralized. And when I say that, I mean it won't always happen in a building. Kids and families, as the world evolves over the next 10 years, will continue to find ways to learn that suits them. This model allows us much more flexibility and sharing of resources into the future. In short, this model, we're calling it, for lack of a better term, a community campus because it unites resources at 2 central campuses. We project that if this model were to come to fruition, the best case scenario in any planning process would be in 2023, and it would put around 1,200 students on the Thomas Nelson campus and 1,300 students at the Nelson County campus. We believe that this allows us to achieve greater family engagement. We also believe that it allows us to increase greater student engagement. Part of this conversation is the last 24 hours. We just started the conversation yesterday. So the last 24 hours, there's been a lot of conversations around safety. What does it look like to have a 6th grader on the same campus as a 12th grader? I just left Boston and New Haven earlier today. That's not a concern that they particularly have because they have kindergartners and 8th graders in the same hallway. At the same time, much of our reality around safety and thinking about engagement comes down to one thing: community and the culture of that community. And I think we all know that safety is a byproduct of strength in the community and culture in the community. And we don't see 6th, 7th, and 8th graders integrated into a significant number of upper level classes, largely because they're not going to qualify for those classes. We do see a middle school wing at Thomas Nelson and Nelson County. But we also know that sometimes there are students that choose to seek out great opportunity. And those students that choose those opportunities, whether it be band, whether it be taking advanced calculus when they're in 8th or 9th grade, we have students that can do those things. We don't want to be the lid on their success. We want our kids to be able to leave our schools to have greater empowerment and success as anybody in the state of Kentucky. And we believe this model allows us that type of flexibility. Additionally, we can't invest in 6 secondary schools to offer all things to all kids. We can't have 6 band programs in 6 places, 6 STEM programs in 6 places that activate in the same way in New Haven, Boston, Bloomfield, and Bardstown. It's unrealistic for us to do what we want to do for kids in a model that has a resource dilution pattern. Lastly, I think this is really important as you talk about what happened today with that MOA conversation around Jennifer, the community member that's a part of this process of being part of the plat, is we need to unite high-quality professionals for our 612 students across time and space. And I can assure you, it's going to be more long-term sustainable to retain and recruit high-quality professionals for our kids in a model that is more robust, where they can build a program, they can build opportunities and experiences. I'll say this again. If we knew, and I say we as a district, we as a team of principals, we as a team at the district level, if we knew what we knew today 10 years ago, this would have been a more sustainable, long-term growth model than what we have with 2 high schools. You can't see it. We see it now. That's what we're talking about. Lastly, and this is to me, there's simply no argument against this. The access to academic course offerings, the access to increased early college career experiences, the access to student leadership and athletic experiences changes for the better under this model. All in all, we have 5 specific school campuses as a part of the initial conversation. As a board, you will naturally, if this comes to life, be able to prioritize how that plays out and also be able to prioritize where we allocate different types of funding. The conversation primarily starts at Nelson County High School and ties into the Area Technology Center that would include really a revamp and a remodel of that campus to unite the 2 buildings physically and also unite that campus to really be a world-class place of learning. Remodeling the entire 1969 side to be in alignment with what we see for the future of learning in the next 10 years. At Thomas Nelson High School, there would be a middle school wing that would be added to accommodate the additional 400 to 500 students. We would not need capacity of 400 to 500 students because the building still has some capacity now. But we know we're going to need additional space in that building to bring in a middle school wing. At New Haven and Cox's Creek, this building, we see a modernization and remodeling process in the hallways, in the entrances, in the classrooms, allowing our schools and elementary schools to begin to redesign what learning experiences can look like over the next 10 years. These conversations, though, will all potentially begin with the LPC over the next few weeks. Each of these schools we feel and we recommend really as a priority in this conversation. So this is, Mr. Goff and I talked quite a bit, this is a best case timeline. To be frank, the best thing to do for our kids would be to move towards something of this nature in the coming year. That's unrealistic. We have a lot of conversation to have. In fact, the best case scenario is a 2-year model that would allow us to transition to a community campus. Spring and summer, we begin the process, talking about the process, initiating the LPC, talking at each of the next few board meetings around where we want to go. In the fall, hypothetically, if we do move forward, we could begin to put some designs on the table of this is what buildings could look like, this is what campuses could look like. Best case scenario is a year, 13, 14 months from now, you could begin construction on certain projects. Best case scenario. The reality of supply and demand on the market, potential construction costs, and the politics and bureaucracy of the state all can impact that. So here is our reality right now as we sit here tonight, is we really wanted to begin a conversation with our employees, and a part of that conversation was around 3 questions. Some of you have the pamphlet here tonight. Those 3 questions focus us these 3 questions focus us. Because if I've learned anything in this work, everyone in our community, we have about 4,500 families and students. Every family is looking through a different lens. While people tend to group together and think about things in certain ways, people are looking through a different lens. So the 3 questions, and I would encourage you tonight as well, if you're a part of our guest comments, if you're part of our community, to allow these 3 questions to focus some of our conversation. Knowing that over the next 3 weeks, we'll be talking about these same questions at Boston, at Bloomfield Elementary, at New Haven, Cox's Creek, Foster Heights, Nelson County, Thomas Ellison, and again at Boston on May 18th. So the 3 questions are really, I think, the most important piece to where we're starting. And the first one is, what is important to you in this process? So for example, I think the applause for the 612 comment suggests that safety is important in the conversation. Ensuring safety of our students seems to be at the forefront of that conversation. The second question is, what do students and parents need? This is really for our staff to evaluate how we can play a role in that conversation, because we're not and while many of us may be parents in our schools, every parent's looking through a different lens. Lastly, what role do we play as a community member, as a parent, as an educator in this conversation? These 3 questions will focus our community discussions when we begin those over the next few weeks. So, like anything, information tends to move fast, especially in the world of this. This conversation, while it's online at ncommunitycampus.com, really, it's going to take months to have. And I want you as a parent, as a community member, as someone that's on part of the Gazette or the Kentucky Standard, to be fully empowered with the information. The reality is, we're just starting the conversation, so everyone got a different piece of it. We wanted to make sure our staff has the information to start the conversation. Today, parents got that information. The last 2 days, we've been working with staff members across the district. I met with Boston, met with New Haven today, met with Bloomfield Middle School and Okeechobee Home yesterday as well. I'm meeting with community members in Bloomfield over the next 3 days to begin to talk about this conversation. I think it's important that we started with our staff, right? So over the next 3 days, we're beginning that conversation at Bloomfield with a number of community leaders to allow them to understand what we're wanting to do in terms of access for students. This is not an attempt to close schools. It's not an attempt to create a space where we have some model of high school that's never existed before. We're really being proactive in innovating before high schools start to totally change over the coming decade. This is a proactive stance to increase access and opportunity. And I think that's the most important piece. The reactive model means what happened to what we used to think it looked like. This is a much more proactive, not only financially flexible, but also it's a more proactive model as we think about the future of learning. So, a couple pieces I'll also address before I take a seat and we have guest comments. There's been conversations about what do we do, hypothetically, if 3 years from now we do transition. What do we do with the buildings? And I think there's no answer to that question, because all of those take time. We begin working with the city of Bloomfield. If Bloomfield Middle School transitions to the Nelson County campus, we begin working with the city of Bloomfield as soon as this plan, if it was formalized. We begin that conversation very seriously with the city of Bloomfield and the local community businesses there, because their needs for the future are beyond our current site, and really they've not had this conversation in the way they would need to. In terms of Okeechobee Home Middle School, there have been conversations about what do you do with that building, because it's in an ideal location and it's united on that campus already. And again, there's no answer to that. We know we want to leverage that building. It's a great access point. It could potentially be a future technology center, an extension of what we already want to do with regional workforce training and supports. But those are all conversations that we've just started having with mayors and with other people in our community and potentially our Future Ready Alliance as we look at the next few months. So I covered a few pieces there that I think are going to be part of a conversation piece. And I think that the real answer is it's a process. Everything takes time. We're beginning that conversation tonight. I think what's exciting for the conversation is we have people who are paying attention, and we have people who are thinking about the future of schools. And that's exactly the point of the facility planning process. So thank you for being here tonight. I'm gonna, unless you guys have questions, I'm gonna take a seat, and then we'll talk about the next board meeting, and then we'll transition to guest comments. Unless you guys have questions or comments tonight, you want to start. So this is the first public conversation, just to be clear, this is the first public conversation that anyone has had about this, and we're beginning that tonight. So any additional comments, statements as we think about it from your lens?
I'm looking around, of course, my contacts are starting at this late meeting. Is Ethan still here, the young gentleman?
Yeah, he's here.
No?
He's in another room.
No, that's fine. No, while I was wondering if he was here, I was going to ask him if he could remember how many years I told him I've been in K-12 education, and I told him 45, and of course he kind of looked at me like, huh? And my point in that was from first grade, there was no kindergarten where I went to school, from first grade all through high school, into my career as a middle school math teacher, into the work I do, that's my paying job, into this work as a board member. It's always been K-12 education. And the one thing that I'm hearing you talk about is, looking back on the historical perspective, is traditionally we have built buildings. We put brick and mortar on the ground, and then we figured out what to put in those buildings. So let's build a square building, let's build square classrooms, let's build a gym, let's build a cafeteria, and now let's put K through 5 in it, or let's turn it into the Area Technology Center, or 50 years ago, the VOTEC Center, as it was known, for many of us that have been around the community that long. No, Miss, I'm not looking at you.
Thank you.
I know you thought I was looking at you on the but I think what I'm hearing you talk about is historically we've always built a building and then figured out what are we going to do with it. Whereas now what I'm starting to hear is, do we need to figure out what do our students need to have opportunities and success, and then figure out what do our buildings need to look like to meet that need. And I think that's possibly an important thing for us to think about as these conversations start happening over the next several weeks and months, as you were saying, Superintendent Bradley, is that, you know, does it mean that there is a perfect solution? I don't think anybody would say that. But I think it's something we do need to start thinking about, is not structures, but students, programs, opportunities, experiences that they'll have access to. And then through this LPC process, the local planning committee, which as you said has to be done every 4 years, although I think we've got an exception to restart it earlier than normal, so that we can figure out what do our buildings need to look like as a community to meet those needs of our students. So that's kind of what I'm starting to gather from this. I don't know if I'm on the right thought path or...
And I'd say the reality of the 20th century was school didn't change much from 1900 to 2000. We went 100 years and school was relatively the same. That's because the internet wasn't in existence, and because the way we did teaching and learning was really built on a pre-20th century model. We all experienced that. So there is relevance and there's power in that model. But we know that the future, the next 10 to 20 years, the way we think about secondary learning has to continue to evolve. And we have to have high enough expectations for our middle schoolers and high schoolers that when they leave, they're going to be capable of doing things that we were wholly incapable of doing.
Well, and I mean, one thing that I've often said, I say it to my own high school son, I said it to my high school daughter when she was at Nelson County High School several years back, is that school experience, whether it's at high school level or the middle school level, some of it is to learn certain topics, certain subjects, things that we all need to have as a foundation. And sometimes it's also for the student to figure out what they want to be. You know, what is it that they have an interest in? But it's also just as much an ability to find out what I don't want to be. And I think back to, was it last month we were at the airport? And there was a student in that Bluegrass Aerospace experience, and I've shared that student's story with other school districts that I visit, in that the student wanted to fly. They wanted to be a pilot. They had this dream of whether it was to fly for UPS, Delta, whatever it might be. The student goes up in that small plane the first time and gets airsick and says, this isn't for me. I am not going to fly. But what they then discovered is I still want to be involved in an aerospace experience. They want to be, is it David, the director of the airport? David Mattingly. They want to be a David Mattingly. And so that experience has given them insight into what they don't want to be as well as what they want to be. And I think that some of what I'm hearing that you're talking about is opportunities for students to figure out what they want, what they don't want, and how do we structure our facilities to give them those opportunities.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I mean...
Nope, you're fine. Any other discussion? No?
There was one more piece that I think was, that came up was, I just lost it, so we'll move on.
I'm sorry.
It's important to the process as we look. So I think tonight, we're grateful for community being here. And really, I just want to bring us back to, like, everyone's looking through a different lens. And that is community. The questions that we're looking to as we listen is what's most important to you as a family? What do students and parents need in this conversation over the coming months? And what roles do we need to play to provide more clarity in the process? And those questions will generate value in our conversations. So I say that because that's our focus with teachers, with team members across Nelson County, over 600, and it's really going to be our focus with families in the coming weeks. So,
you know, if I can, I'll just add one other thing, because it's something I saw this past Sunday, and I'm looking to see if there are other parents maybe here that are part of that. My son plays soccer for Nelson County High School, and they had their soccer banquet after it being delayed because of COVID. And I listened to what our coaches said, and at Nelson County High School, the JV team is honestly comprised primarily of 7th and 8th graders. So there is one, maybe two of them that I'll call it play up. They play varsity. And I heard our coaches talk about the asset that those middle school students have brought to that high school soccer team, building the program and the leadership that they have, and how there was one particular student, I won't say his name, but one particular student that the coaches were praising for what they brought to that team of high school players. And I think that's something else that I see as a possibility. You know, we've got to figure out, can this work? How could it work? But the opportunity for leadership across 6-12 grade levels.
there's no question. I think that's the thing is so employees in Nelson County schools, most people that are in middle schools or high schools are able to see a little more easily that culture creates behavior, creates certain responses. If you have a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade school building that has really strong culture, those kids should not, in a sense, create an unsafe environment. If you have a culture in a building that's not strong, you could create a very unsafe 6th, 7th, and 8th grade environment. If you have a weak high school, the same goes for that. You have a strong one. If you have a strong 6-12 model, safety isn't the issue. I would argue that it increases safety, because when you put a 11th and 12th grader in a school building where they know and looking out for other kids especially, do 6th, 7th, and 8th graders look out for each other in the same way? Possibly. Do high schoolers have an opportunity to look out for each other and their kids? Most surely, if the culture is strong. Culture is king and queen. And any time we talk about these, at the same time, the lens our community is looking through is not in the school building. There are very few people that work in school buildings, right? So I want to honor that reality and put safety out there right away as a primary point. The other reality is the city of Bloomfield is going to potentially face conversations about the impact on local economies, impact on the way we think about what it looks like to be a part of that community, because some students that live close to that building had a vision for this or that over the next few years. Some businesses were thinking about how that school benefits that business. And that's a reality that I can't fully appreciate, because I'm not in that world. So I just want people to know we're entering into that conversation very proactively. And we're entering into that conversation with an open heart and mind around what it looks like. And I think that's where we start the conversation tonight. I don't know what the process looks like when we start guest comments, but we got one more piece on the board calendar here, which is a simple recommendation. If we want to move towards that. Simple recommendation of move. So tonight was a special called meeting because we changed the location to here from the central office. In the future, it won't be a special called meeting because we just changed the location before the meeting. So we recommend a change to the location of our next meeting to the Boston School on May 18th. So that is the recommendation on the calendar.